Welcome to lecture series in CIS 212 for chapter 4. This is part 2. I'm just going to mention the message box show method on 223. We've already looked at the basic of that. There are a bunch of different implementations and you can add arguments into it to get different looks. Just remember that you kind of have to know why you're doing it before you decide what kind of icons and buttons to display and that sort of thing. If it's just to give them a little information about something, then you would use the message box icon dot information and it shows you a picture of what it is. If they're about to delete something and you want to make sure that they're doing what they really want to do, then you'd use the stop icon. And so I'm going to let you play with that on your own and work your way through it. According to the book, they give you all sorts of different examples of how you can actually query the message box button to find out whether they hit yes or no or cancel or whatever, and on page 225 they kind of show you that. All right, the rest of this stuff is things we've already done. I'm going to jump over to the end of the chapter here because there are ways to validate what a user's doing to make sure that they're doing the right thing and giving you the right kind of data, okay? And there are ways to do that using different events for text boxes. For example, I have two text boxes here. One is called text price. The other one's called text quantity. And all this does is it takes the price of an item entered by the user and multiplies it by the quantity and gives you an order total in dollars and cents. Okay. That being the case, you wouldn't want to have a bunch of try catches in there. I mean, you could do this. It's certainly fine. But to me, it's easier if you can do it to just eliminate the possibility of the user putting in something that you've got to evaluate and then respond to. Now, try catch, you should always use those regardless, but this is a little different example of how you can do this with Windows apps. All right. Now, the default event for text box is text changed. So if you double click on it, it's going to give you a text changed. I've already got some events in here. Now there's another one called key press. If they press a key for every keystroke, it's going to fire that event, and you can put code in there and do things to the text before it's displayed, right? And there's also key down event and a key up event. And the order in which these things fire is important because you can get into a recursive situation if one event causes another event, which causes another event, and because you're doing things, you have to sort of understand the order of these. So the order is like this: key press, key down, and then key up. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That's that's the order in which these are fired. So then I'm outputting my total to a label. I have a calculate button and an exit button. Let's look at the code here, and let's start off with the text changed event. That's the one you're most familiar with. Now, I have a private variable, which is really just a flag, an error flag. If it starts off as false, if it's true, that means there's been an error in what the user's entered. I use these a lot. In this case, I've got it at class scope so that all my events can see it. When we get into classes, that probably wouldn't be the best way to do it, as I've said before. Now, I want to introduce you to something else. There's quite a lot of code in most applications. This is not very much considered to what you will see. But you can sort of tidy this up using a region. And you just simply type in pound region and then whatever it is you're going to encapsulate in this. And all this does is enables you to collapse everything. You wind up with that. And then when you expand it, there's your event code, right? So that's a pretty cool little tool. Now, you start off with pound region and give it a descriptor if you want to. I like to, excuse me, pardon me, so that I can know what I'm looking for, right? And then you have to do an end region. C# has the same thing. So if you got tons of code in a code page and you put regions around everything, you can collapse them all and have a nice little tidy page. You ain't got to scroll through everything to find these things. And it's going to jump right out at you because if you give it a text value, it will do that. So let me collapse this region and say I'm going through and I want to look for my text change event handler. Well, if I look at this, there it is. I just expand it and I get to the code. That's something you might want to use. I guess they'll mention it eventually in the book, but I certainly find it advantageous. So now this text price text changed handles text price and text quantity. So I have just one event for two text change events for two objects. Now, we talked about that before. You can have as many in here as you want. If you're going to have duplicate events for the same kind of object and you got duplicate code in there, if you got 15 text boxes, which is an extreme example, and they all have the same code, you don't want 15 different text changed events with the same code in it. When all you have to do is use the handles keyword and just use a comma delimited list to tell it to use all 15 text boxes or whatever they are. So what I'm doing here is every time a text is changed, either by a backspace, a delete key, or they're entering something, or they're backspacing all the way out, I'm toggling these button states. Now let me explain to you. That's another way that you can avoid getting into trouble and having to do something to evaluate something the user's done wrong. You simply drop the gate down and don't let them do it to start with. Okay, that's my philosophy. That's not everybody's philosophy. You can't always do it this way. Most of the time, a lot of times you got to do a try catch and then handle it, the exception. But if you can get away with just stopping it, then it's simpler to me. So in other words, I don't want to calculate anything if there's nothing in both of these boxes, because that's going to give me a divide by zero or something like that. I'll have to encapsulate all my math in a try catch block and then output some message telling them what's wrong. Then set the focus back to the one that's the problem. Then you have to deduce which one through the error, right? That's some time consuming code too. So what I do is if there's nothing in here, they can't click calculate. I disable it. I set enable property to false, right? So let's take a look at that. And let me explain that to you. Okay, so button state, one or the other. So it's either if text price, and I'm trimming off spaces because space is a character, but you don't want to do math on a character, a space. So I trim it to start with and make sure there's no beginning and ending spaces. If it's empty or else, and that's the short circuit operator, or, right, or else, the other text box property is empty. If either one of them are empty, you don't have enough numbers to calculate. So I'm setting the button calc.enable property to false. And then this label text, I'm emptying out that text in case they calculated something and then go back and change the two values in the text boxes. Once they change one or the other, then whatever was outputted from the last calculation is no longer valid. So you shouldn't leave it setting there. You need to wipe that out too. Okay, that's just common sense. If they've calculated a price of $10 per item and they've got 3 items and you output $30, and they go back and backspace on the 30 or the 3 or whatever the price is, and it changes the price, well then the output should be deleted because that's from a different price number. You see what I'm saying? So you want to always do that. And then here's for the other. However, if they're not empty, if they're both not empty, that means there's something of value in both of them, then you enable the calc button. Okay? But you still need to go ahead and delete that string. And I could have actually just put this line of code outside of both these ifs, because it needs to run no matter what, but this is just the way I had it set up. So one extra line. Let's run it. See what happens just with this button states. We'll look at the validation code in a minute. All right, so I'm going to put, notice that it starts off, I set this to default at design time enabled equals false. All right, I put one value in, it's still false. Now I've got 2 valid items in here, at least we think they are. Calculate is on. If I backspace out one of these, it's off because I don't have what I need. And that's fine. That's the way it should be. On, off, on, off, backspace. See? Okay, exit. Now there's more going on here than that, but that if the text changes, it looks at that. Okay, so that's what's going on. And again, the region, and collapse that kind of get rid of it. I didn't put regions everywhere. I just wanted to show you that one. You could do it though, and I typically do it on every event handler I have. Okay, so we have button count click, and what this does is if it's able to be clicked, then that means everything's been validated. It's numeric, and I've got everything I need, and I'll show you how that works in a minute. Then I'm going to go ahead and output my price in my label total.txt. I'm using the format function, which in VB allows you to do some things, and I'm converting the text to, I'm trimming off any spaces, converting it to a double, and I'm doing that to both of them. And then format will let you use a format string. So what I want is the $sign with as many pounds digits as I need, and then I want to make sure that I have a 0 at the end if needed, .00, and you can look at that. But there are different ways to format it, but I just want dollars and cents with a comma delimiter. And then I'm setting the focus, now this is cool, back to text price. All right, that's so the user doesn't have to click off. I click down here, this has the focus, now I got to click back up here because I want to do another calculation. Well, that automatically helps the user out a little bit and saves a step. You should always be thinking in those terms. What can I do without getting too complicated to help the user out? Okay, maybe you want to go to the exit button, but you can set focus to any object that can accept focus. And in this case, it's just dot focus. It's a method of the text box. So that sets it back to that particular control. All right. Now let's get down to the nitty gritty. I have a text price key down event, which I added in the properties. I mean, it's pretty easy to do. Come over here, go to lightning bolt, and it'll show you all the different. You can just there's text change, and I've got let's see where the rest of them are. And here somewhere. For some reason or other, I'm not seeing them all. There they are. Key down, key press. Okay, so that I'm just using that first text box to handle both the price text and the quantity text. So you can see if you want to add something that's not a default, you have to come over here, select it, and then click the lightning bolt. Because if you double click on it, all it does is add the default event. You have to go into here if you want to do anything else. All right, so let's go back, take a look at this. Here's my text price key down event. So every time they press a key, this is going to fire, but not before key press. Key press fires first, right? Then it jumps back up here. All right, so I think I've got the order right on those. So let's look at this. Now it's handling, again, both of these text boxes because it's the same code for both. There's no need to have duplicate events handlers for the same thing. Now remember that scope, that class level scope variable I have up here? That's a error flag, a Boolean error flag. Well, I'm resetting it here because I have to assume that maybe in a previous run it was set to true. When it gets in here, I need to reset it to false, and then later on I'll set it to true if I need to. And here's where I'm doing that. Notice that in the argument list of most of these, you have the sender object, which has information about what object actually fired this event, because you might want to know, is it this one? Is it this one? Which one did it? Okay. And depending on which one might have thrown an error, then you might want to set focus back to that one. So that's the way to deduce that. And then there's the E object, which gives you all these key event arguments. Now this is the one that we use to filter keystrokes. Right? It says here, deduce whether the keystroke is a number from the top of the keyboard. And what do they mean? Well, you've got numbers at the top of your keyboard, and then you have a numeric pad on the right. Those have different key values, so you got to look at both of them. Here we say if key code less than keys. Now keys is a class that has all these key events and key values in there. So if it's at the top of the keyboard, it's going to be keys.d0, which is the 0, or else E key code greater than keys.9, and the D represents the top of the keyboard. So what we're saying here is if the key code is less than 0 or greater than 9, that means they press some other key that may not be numeric. We want to make sure that it's one of those. Okay. So if either one of those is true, then go in here and deduce if the keystroke is a number from the keypad. All right. And we do that here, numpad. See that? And we want 0 through 9. That's all we're going to allow because it's got to be digits 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If they're pressing a key that's a P or a capital M or a less than or a minus, it's not going to deal with that. Okay, we want to filter that out, and that's what we're doing here. All right. So if that's true, if those are valid zeros through nines, then deduce whether the keystroke is a backspace. We need to allow a backspace so that if they make a mistake, they can backspace it. If you filter that out, they have to delete the whole thing and start over again. So if it's not a backspace and it's not from the keypad and it's not a 0 through 9 from the numeric keys at the top, if all that's false, we have an error. We don't want to keep that keystroke. Now, this all happens before it's displayed in the text box. So the user's not going to, you could ding you could make a little sound or whatever you want to do, flash up a error box, just up to you. In this case, I'm just setting this global error flag. It says here a non-numerical keystroke was pressed, set the flag to true, and evaluated in the key press event. So it looks like I have this wrong. The key down events first, key press, and then key up. That's the order. I apologize. So let me go over that again because I don't want to mislead you. It's key down happens first, then key press, then key up, apparently. It's been a while since I've looked at that. Okay, so then this fires, and again, this is handling text price and text quantity, and we're just evaluating this global variable here. If non-number entered is true, then we're hosing that, we're losing that, we're destroying that keystroke. That's what this does. E.handle equals true means just ignore it, act like it didn't happen because it's not a valid key. All right. That's why when we get back up in here on the next pass, I have to set it back to false so I can set it to true if I need to. All right. So let me run it and let's take a look at that and see how that's going to work for us. This is something I came up with a long time ago, and I might try to send this to everybody just so you can play around with it if I think it's necessary. Okay, so if I press, I'm going to press a lowercase m, nothing. I'm going to press a Z, nothing happens. It's filtering it out using the key down and key press event. So this is a really cool way to do it. Minus sign, equal sign. There's an 8. It took that. What about backspace? Yes, it let me do a backspace. Okay. Now the problem is I don't have the functionality for a dot, but I could easily put it in right here. There are ways to do that too. Using a regular expression evaluator, you can do it. There are other ways to do this. Actually makes it a little bit easier than what I'm doing, but I've showed you this because they're doing it at the end of the chapter. And I might get into regular expressions. I know I will in C#. Might do it here as well. It's an old Unix, or excuse me, a mainframe and a Linux tool. All right, let's put the quantity in, 23. Again, my button will disable if I don't have valid numbers in there. So they can't hit the calculate button and grab an empty text, try to convert it to a number, then you got to trap the error and throw up a message and tell them you missed it. It just doesn't let them do it. And there's my format function that's doing the text. And my exit button. So, what I would do is I would go in here and put a region in all of these. I'd do pound region. And I would say this is key down. So that would be my string that would display in the region. And I would do it like that. And then you have to do an end region or it'll throw an error. So let's do our end region. Pound end region. All right. So now I can collapse that. And I can tell what it is because I've got that text price underscore key down in my string there. So you can collapse a lot of real estate here by using those regions. I highly recommend that. Okay. And it puts its own in there. There's one called that Windows put in there. So, all righty. Now I would go through and do it in all of these. This is a pretty cool technique. There's probably a better way to do it using those regular expressions because you can tell it filter everything but what I'm giving you in the string, and that way you could have commas and dots and dollar signs, whatever you wanted to. This is just a little early to get into that. Just remember that there are ways to filter out unwanted, invalid data types other than waiting for the user to type it in, and then you have to tell it, when it throws an error, you have to handle it in a try catch and then display a message of some sort. You You didn't type in a numeric character in this text box and then throw the focus back to the text box and select the text so that when they type a valid number, it will wipe out the invalid number and, so forth. So, some of that you do to help the user, but if you could just keep them from making those mistakes, that's a better approach, in my opinion. Okay? Well, that's the end of chapter 4. Have a good day.